All right, let's kick things off. So, welcome and thank you so much for tuning into Tree Talks today. Canopy's founder and executive director, Nicole Rycroft, will be joined by the incredible Wanjira Mathai. For those of you who don't know, Wanjira leads World Resources Institute's Restore Local project, working with communities across Africa to restore forest landscapes and build climate resilience. You'll hear more about that later. WRI's work is bold and visionary and was also recognized alongside Canopy as one of this year's Audacious Project recipients. So Nicole will officially introduce Wanjira in mere moments for an in-depth and intimate conversation on their audacious climate ideas. For those who don't know me, my name is Katie Hicks. I'm Finance and Change Manager at Canopy, joining you today from Vancouver Island, where for thousands of years, the Quetzin, Malahat, Subaset, Halalt, Panalakat, Suminas, and Layaxan peoples have stewarded their traditional unceded territories. I'd like to address that in the local Hokanam language where I'm from. Thank you. So a few quick notes about our session today. Please feel free to ask a question by using the Q&A function in Zoom. So you'll just find that at the bottom screen, and you might have to press the 3 dots more button, and we'll address those questions at the end of our session. Please refrain from messaging Nicole, Wanjira, or myself directly, as we won't be able to view your questions that way. So if we don't get to your question in the Q&A, we'll happily follow up via email, or you can always reach out to say hi anytime at hello@canopyplanet.org. You can refer to the chat for a few technical instructions. For example, if your internet does cut out, you're welcome to use the phone dial-in numbers found in your event invite or in the chat to call in. You can also enable closed captioning if you'd like to follow along that way. So just use the More button where you see the 3 dots and then select captions. So we are so thrilled that you've joined us today. I personally can't wait to hear from Nicole and Wanjira and hear all about the audacious spirit that they share. So for those new to Canopy's work, hello, welcome. Nicole Rycroft is our founder and executive director. She spent the last 25 years protecting the world's forests, advancing international human rights, and sparking the shift to a global green economy through supply chain revolution, so no small feat. She's an Ashoka Fellow, a member of the UBS Global Visionaries Program, and a recipient of the Meritorious Service Cross of Canada, as well as the winner of the 2020 Climate Breakthrough Award. So please take it away, Nicole. We're so thrilled that you joined us here today with Wanjira. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, Katie. And I'm not used to being introduced like I'm at a conference on our own channel. So thanks for that. I've stopped blushing now. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. As Katie mentioned, we're so excited that you're here. Our head office is on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I'm actually joining you today from Copenhagen, where I'm attending a global fashion and sustainability event. And it's wonderful, really, to be with you all. Thank you for those on the West Coast that have gotten up very early. For those of you who are in other time zones around the world, good afternoon, good evening. And I'm really excited about today's Tree Talks episode, as I'm joined by actually one of my favorite people in the conservation movement. Quickly, just for those of you who aren't familiar with us, Canopy is a solutions-driven NGO. We work to protect the world's forests, species, and climate, and help support frontline community rights. And we do that by transforming unsustainable supply chains. So we currently work with more than 900 large corporate consumers, brands, as well as producers and innovators to shift the paper, the packaging, and the viscose textile supply chains out of the world's climate critical and biodiverse forests. And this enables us to create a value proposition to transform these supply chains that are currently driving deforestation and forest degradation, so that forests can be protected to hit planetary targets in the next decade and the next 7 years. Our work to conserve forests is through the supply chain and is always done in close partnership with an amazing network of NGOs. And so the Tree Talks series enables us to help bring light to some of the other incredible organizations, both globally as well as locally, be they science organizations, advocacy NGOs, community development focused programs that are just doing very exciting work. So I'm really excited to spend the next 50 minutes in conversation with our friend, and as Katie mentioned, one of our sisters in arms of this year's Audacious projects, Wanjira Mathai. So aside from being an incredible human being, Wanjira is an award-winning environmentalist. She is the managing director for Africa and global partnerships at the World Resources Institute. She's also the current chair of the Wanjira Mathai Foundation and chair of the Green Belt Movement in Kenya. Wanjira has more than 20 years, although I think, to be honest, her entire lifetime has been advocating for social and environmental change on both local levels, a continental level within Africa, as well as internationally. And she has also served in numerous important strategic and advocacy roles on the visibility of global issues like climate change, the importance of youth leadership, sustainable energy, and landscape restoration. Wanjira leads the World Resources Institute's Restore Local initiative, which is focused on accelerating locally led land restoration of Africa's vital landscapes and forests. She's also one of this year's Time 100 and has a long list of accolades. So Wanjira, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. I know you're beaming in from Switzerland at the moment, so lovely to have you for the next 50 minutes.
Am I unmuted? Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, the network is a little bit off, but I have turned on my alternative just in case we need it.
A little backup.
First of all, Nicole, thank you so much for having me and for this opportunity to have a chat with you. It's really great to see you again. I have to say, I have a lot of respect for the work you do since I met you, but also since supply chains are everything I'm finding out. So thank you for having me.
That's right. They don't sound very sexy, but as we both know, they are kind of everything when it comes to, well, at least part of everything. So one of the things that I always love about hearing you speak is just how you have this ability to kind of immediately transport me to the middle of a forest. Anyway, so I was hoping that you might be able to share, just to kind of get us all in the mood, like your first memory of being in a forest. Mine's back in Australia, where it's very noisy and loud and kind of a sensory overload. What's your first memory of being in a forest?
That's such a wonderful question. First of all, the first time I was in a forest was much after I had been talking about forests. So it's funny that I went in and I was blown away. I went into the Aberdare forest, which is one of the water towers of Kenya. Kenya has 5 forested mountains that serve as water towers, and the Aberdares is a range that is quite long, that goes all the way from almost one part of the country to the other. Stunningly beautiful. I could see that, but I was struck by a few things that I saw. One, the diversity of vegetation. You look at a forest and you think you see everything. It looks like broccoli, but there were, as we walked in, it was bamboo forests, right? Thick bamboo forests. And then we walked on and the vegetation started to change into these beautiful trees that were massive, hundreds of years old, but also with other growth on them. So how much these trees were supporting other growth, some of them parasitic, some of them just symbiotic, but you could see that they were all dependent. Then there were all these vines. It was complex. It was a lot more complex than I thought. But I have to say my favorite part or parts of it were the birds I saw, birds I had never seen before, that flashed different colors as they took off and flew. And then the fish in these crystal clear rivers. And our guide said, that's why we didn't carry water. You just drink the water from the river. It was idyllic. And I just thought, wow, this is and there was water everywhere, right? Everywhere you stepped, there was water. These were really water towers, and it was the first time it all came to life to me. It was fresh, it was beautiful, but it was much more complex than I had ever imagined.
I love that turn of phrase, water towers. Farces, water towers, especially, I mean, I come from Australia, and 85% of Australia is semi-arid. And Africa is, I think, for a lot of people, when they think of Africa, they think of large expanses of arid or semi-arid land. So to have that kind of contrast with the water towers that forests provide. It's so amazing when you walk into a forest ecosystem or into a forest, right? Just the immediate drop in temperature and how cool it is. Yeah. So you wear a couple of different hats. You're the managing director for the Africa and Global Partnerships Program at WRI. You're leading the Restore Local initiative, working to restore Africa's vital landscapes by investing in locally led restoration initiatives. We'll get to more specifically about that later, but can you first tell us a little bit about what you do at WRI, as well as then Restore Local and the Greenbelt movement?
Well, WRI is a place that has been a gift because I get to work on Africa, which is where I'm from, and I as the Africa director for the last 3 years, and then just this year, at least last year, became the Global Partnerships Director. So what I do really is lead a team of brilliant people who actually, quite frankly, Nicole, do a lot of the hard work. They are the ones who have.
I know that feeling.
The Restore Local and others. But WRI's work is essentially about inclusive transformation of people and nature. And we have essentially made a bet on 3 key systems that if we transform food, land, and water systems, our forests, food, and water systems, if we transform how we grow our cities, and if we transform our energy systems, then we can actually trigger inclusive transformation for economic prosperity, etc. So there's a very serious bet on those 3 sectors. And for WRI, as a research organization, we have this motto that we love: we count it, change it, scale it. So we actually have a research basis for the work that we do. Then we try it out and see if it works. And this is the case with Restore Local. We've been working on Restore Local since 2017. And in those years, we've basically been trying to figure out what would it take to catalyze a restoration movement on the continent. And so that sort of work is research anchored, but also partnership building, etc. And then when we felt we had an idea that was worth pitching, then came Restore Local in the constellation that we will be talking about today. And then my hat, the partnership building for me is just a lot of fun, because what you do as an organization is a drop on the ocean, and acknowledging that nothing happens at the scale that we need without the partnership of other governments, other civil society, local communities, other organizations like us. Like, we have to work together, and that's where partnership building is. When my President and CEO, Annie Dasgupta, offered me this job after the application process, he said to me, what we would like to say, this is a job that didn't exist at WRI, but the growth of WRI at the rate it's growing is unsustainable. We cannot continue to increase in sheer numbers. The strength of this organization will be measured by the quality of its partnerships. And that's really the role. How do we partner genuinely, knowing what our role is? Who else can play sometimes even bigger role? We can be brokers, we can be bridges, we can be different people in different partnerships. But I love that, because it really is about the ultimate outcome and who and which constellation of people are best suited to move it forward.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can get done if you don't care who gets the credit, right? And one of our, like, none of us can stabilize the climate or conserve biodiversity by ourselves. It has to be done in partnership with other NGOs and those in civil society, as well as governments and companies and the business community and many others involved. So yeah, we're big fans of WRI's work. We rely on a lot of the science, the kind of counterpart of the WRI mission and motto, and of course are big fans of what you're doing. If we focus in a little bit more on perhaps the Restore Local initiative, what are the main threats to forests in the countries where your work is focusing on with Restore Local?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. There's several factors that play into what we call either forest degradation or forest destruction. One is agriculture. There's a huge push on forest and encroachment of forest into agricultural land. I mean, when you mentioned, Nicole, the semi-arid and arid Australia, Kenya is 2/3 arid, semi-arid, or desert. And that means only a third is arable. And within that third, everything is happening, right? So
Right.
a lot of the agriculture, which has to be quite intensive, but it's not yet quite as I would say, we're not optimizing the production. And I don't mean industrial terms, but even just how we farm. I think we still could do so much better about productivity, whether it's in regenerative ways, agroecological ways, but we're not optimizing. And so what has happened typically is as soils get degraded, the push for agriculture has been into forest areas, indigenous forests, and there are even words sometimes for people who farm in the forest, say that the soil there is healthy, it's fat. That's healthy. The soil
it's fat. I love
fat.
that.
It's really healthy. So they go into the forest to cultivate. And of course, we know it compromises the integrity of forest. So I would say agriculture, encroachment by agriculture and agricultural practices is one of the biggest ones. We also have soil erosion, a lot of erosion happening as degradation happens. You have erosion that can sometimes render what would be, restorable elements of the forest completely devastated. So that's another. And then there's deforestation for charcoal. This is largely artisanal, but it is still significant when 90% of communities rely on charcoal for cooking. Then
Sure.
it's significant.
And then in terms of country or geographic scope, obviously your work is, going to kind of cover all of Africa at some point. But at this moment, kind of with Restore Local, you're focusing in on 5 countries. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, 3 landscapes, 5 countries.
Right. And so Kenya, Ghana.
Yeah, the Kenyan Rift Valley, elements of the Rift Valley, and then the Ghanaian Cocoa Belt, and the Rusizi River Basin. And this is a basin that goes from DRC, the Kivu area, all the way down to Lake Tanganyika in Burundi. So it's a very beautiful. The river itself is the Rusizi River. The river starts from Rusizi. It starts crystal clear in the Kivus in DRC, and enters Lake Tanganyika brown as the river behind me in that image. So everything that happens in between, the degradation, the siltation, and this river is home to 3 or 2 hydroelectric dams, a third one on the way, and they're largely silting because of the erosion that's happening.
Right. So Katie mentioned this in the kind of introduction to this session, that Canopy, both Canopy and Restore Local and WRI are grantees or recipients of this year's Audacious project. Both of our organization's work is now supercharged by the incredibly generous philanthropic support of the Audacious and TED community, and the belief that they hold in our respective visions for a better world. I know that you've been called many things, being a frontline activist, oftentimes you become a lightning rod. So I know you've been called many things, some of them perhaps more complimentary than others. But what does being labeled as audacious mean to you?
Well, it's a huge compliment, Nicole, and I know you and I share that. A lot of the work that we do is sort of rubs against people sometimes, but it is critical that people see this work as central to everything that needs to be done to address the most important issues of our time. The audacious element of Restore Local is, I see it in two elements. One is the sheer scale of the work that needs to be done, but the one that's really more audacious and the one that really inspires me is the investment in the hyper local movements that drive and are part of the restoration movement. Restore Local is actually about grassroots movements that are charging restoration, that are boots on the ground. It's at the lowest level where restoration takes place. Historically, Nicole, this constituency has been very hard to
They've been left behind, right?
They're always left behind because they're too small, don't have enough capacity, but yet they know restoration better than anybody else. They are the real farmers. They are the magic fingers that make restoration work. And so the questions that we've been asking in a way are wrong, because we've been asking them to be what they are not, which is really good report writers and really good all sorts of things. But what Restore Local has done is say, hey, we really believe in your genius. But we should build the capacity, or we should invest in your capacity to do the rest. It's in our best interest that we help activate whatever is needed to make you successful. It's a different question, it's a different proposition. And so Restore Local is not only investing in the restoration champions and their work, it's also investing in mentoring and coaching them to be able to get better at and become even more investments prepared. And then also investing in very strong monitoring technology to help monitor what's happening and not necessarily leave that to the communities themselves to do it. So drones and geospatial technology that can actually now monitor to the tree what's going on. So the burden on the local communities is not there to do things and gymnastics that they are not suited. But the most important part, which nobody else can do as well as they do, which is the actual work of restoration, is what they are they're able to do. And this has been a gift because we are betting on the local movements that make restoration work and that have always made restoration work. That's why we have a lot of forests intact. We know the role of indigenous people in protecting forests. The most intact, the healthiest, the forests with the most integrity are often in the hands of local communities.
Absolutely. I think the global statistic at the moment is more than 80% of the world's biodiversity is in territories and lands that are managed by indigenous communities, which I think speaks to itself. It's not by chance that that's the figure, right? Wanjira, I think if you could turn up your volume a little bit. We had somebody in the chat just kind of flagged that you're quite soft, or maybe it's because I'm yelling, and so in contrast.
I'm not usually soft. Tell them to give us a thumbs up if they can hear me now.
I can hear you clearer. I hope that works for other folks. Excellent. There we go. Thumbs up. Yeah. Excellent. I think that what you were just chatting about then is so critical, right? Like so often there's this artificial separation between human rights and community rights, frontline community rights and conservation. But if we don't secure durable conservation, well, we won't hit kind of planetary stability, and we don't actually secure durable conservation unless it's actually socially durable. So, you know, and the trust that needs to be placed in communities that have stewarded these landscapes, these lands, that know kind of the natural cycles of them. Not to mention that, you know, developing conservation-based economies that support the advancement of human well-being for frontline forest-dependent communities is actually just the just and the right thing to do. So can you maybe tease out a little bit more how you weave the kind of people and planetary justice with environmental protection together? And I know I've heard you speak about one or two of the kind of community initiatives that you're supporting with Restore Local. Maybe you can just make it a little bit more tangible for folks.
Yeah, well, you know, on a very basic level, we know that a healthy environment supports healthy people. That's one of my favorite connections to make. You have never been to a place where people destroy the environment and thrive, actually quite the opposite. And we are, as a human family, on the precipice. When you saw what happened with COVID and other diseases that come, the zoonotic diseases and the barriers that and maintain the integrity of forest ecosystems, and what is entailed with that has to be maintained. So at the very basic level, we know that we need to maintain healthy forest ecosystems, because not only are they carbon sinks and keep us alive, but they also essentially critical to ecosystem services like water. They are our water towers, as I mentioned earlier. Yeah. They are the source of food for many people. They continue to be the source of medicine for the rest of us. Western medicine is largely anchored on forest products, and of course, a sustainable timber industry, which we know is needed but has to be managed. We have a model that I love as well. It's sort of an evolving paradigm of all of our work on nature. Basically around, we have to produce, protect, reduce, and restore. So you produce how we produce our food. We have to look at how we produce our food, produce it more sustainably, produce it more ecologically, ensure that we can plant in ways that is restorative to the soil. So we reduce inputs that completely destroy our water systems. And then we protect our forests. This is why the work you do is so important. The integrity of forests is hard to replicate in a lifetime. It's so easy to cut down forests and think that you can replant. 200 and 300 years, generations for some of these forests. So we know just how critically important it is to protect what we have. Much more important than restoring is that we protect what we have. And then very quickly is the restoration of what's degraded. But the protection piece is hard. And then we have to reduce our consumption, reduce waste, invest in circularity, and we know now how important that is. So all of that to me captures that crucial link between humans, communities, and this balance that we have to maintain across the board in nature.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier in our conversation, just the importance of scale. Right? Like I think sort of part of the WRI motto that you mentioned was count it, change it, and then scale it. You know, we're pretty focused on scale as well. How do we scale solutions, and how do we accelerate the timeline over which we're scaling these solutions globally? What can you maybe unpack a little bit about the scale of change that you're hoping for over the next between now and 2030 with Restore Local.
Well, Restore Local, Nicole, interestingly, is part of a larger initiative called AFR 100.
By 100.
Initiative, 100 million hectares by 2030. Africa has the largest restoration potential in the world. 700 million hectares is the restoration opportunity. So a lot, but we need to get started. We need to perfect a model that can be scaled and exponentially so. And that's why we are investing in local communities, because we can then look at models that scale exponentially. The Restore Local in those three landscapes is a small part of a larger initiative. And
right.
We have, for example, it's about half the size, or actually 3/4 the size, a quarter the size of where we are trying to go for the landscape, or not even the larger AFR 100. AFR 100 must become a national driven initiative. It is a country driven, African Union sanctioned, and every single country has made a commitment, 130 million hectares in total today. And so if we can catalyze that movement with frontrunners and frontrunner communities like we are in these areas, we know we can trigger in other countries a similar movement. So this is about catalytic work that has to start in certain places where we either have work already started, where we know it's crucial, like the Rusizi River Basin, and then this will be catalytic in how we work in partnership with others in other parts of the continent, but also how we have cross-pollination of ideas. How can the Kenyan restoration movement learn from what's happening in the South and vice versa? And how can we begin to catalyze each other and encourage each other, much like we do in so many other places? We end up in certain places to encourage one another, to catalyze our work, to support each other, to stand in solidarity. So must the restoration movement. We have on the African continent, a very young population. So we're talking about this as the restoration generation. And that's what is most inspiring, that the scale is limitless in a way, because 700 million hectares is the potential.
It's not that 100 million hectares is a small or an ambitious goal to have, but I love the fact that that's an incredible scale of restoration to be undertaking, and with the view of it, really providing that model and the momentum for this kind of much larger transition, kind of a cross-continental move, which I'm sure
is that restoration in many people's minds sometimes sounds like tree planting. It's not, right? So sometimes restoration is just allowing places to come back to life. Thousands of hectares can be void of encroachment and replenish themselves. So that's restoration too. There's so many ways to restore. So I know that it can be done with the right conditions, the right policies, the right champions in the front lines.
Well, and I think we saw that during COVID, right? Sometimes if humans just get out of the way, then it's amazing how resilient nature can be in rebounding and reclaiming spaces. We work quite extensively with some spectacular partners who are working in Indonesia on restoration of landscapes. And sometimes it's just removing the monoculture that has been there, be it a eucalyptus plantation, a palm oil plantation, and then allowing for the natural regeneration of those spaces. And of course, helping the local communities to build conservation-based economies that then enable them to be guardians and stewards of those lands and those forests for the natural kind of services and products that they can provide. So you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I think everybody on this call will be at least familiar with the fact that the world scientific community are calling for 30 to 50% of the world's forests to be formally protected and restored over the course of the next 7 to 10 years or so. That's kind of foundational for us hitting planetary targets. And of course, at Canopy, our emphasis is really on let's conserve these kind of climate critical and biodiverse critical forest landscapes, conservation of the world's ancient and endangered forests. And we work towards that by shifting the supply chains. And I think what I love in terms of just the complementary nature of our work is that yours is so focused on resilient restoration of landscapes and what will happen in Africa, being a model for other landscapes and countries and jurisdictions that also have extensive needs for restoration. What are you sensing, aside from the work that you're doing at a community level? We can talk perhaps a little bit more about the enabling policy conditions or investment. What do you think is necessary to make both the scale of conservation and the scale of restoration that's needed happen on faster timelines?
One of the most important is policy. Policy and the political economy are the most important components of this, because local communities have always wanted to ensure that their landscapes are productive. This is what they depend on. And they've never been the ones to degrade forests at this scale. It's often commercial interests. It's often government concessions that are given to different interests, and sometimes in conservation areas. So I think policy, and that's why policy remains the top pillar for Restore Local. How do we encourage policies that incentivize restoration? How do we ensure there's permanent protection of forests where we can, so that we are not constantly re-adjudicating the same forests all the time when we know just how central they are, especially at a time like this when we face a climate crisis. So those policies are, for me, the most important. And then, of course, the incentives for local communities to engage in restoration, and the opportunities to develop income generating opportunities, ecotourism, and then, of course, education. I've always loved the expression, one of the ministers of environment from Senegal once said, let's see if I can remember this. He said, in the end, we will protect what we love what you know, and you know what you're taught. And making a strong case for education, forests, protection of forests be a strong part of education, that people love forests. You go to countries where people absolutely love their forests. And if you love your forests, then you're not likely to allow anybody to encroach. And I've seen that in Scandinavia. I've seen that in many places that I've been, where I really admire the passion and the love people have for nature. Because when you do have that sort of connection, then it's no longer an intellectual exercise.
No, it's no longer theoretical, right? It's part of your core, part of your DNA. I think sort of maybe just to focus in on the policy piece a little bit before we leave that. I think there's real magic to to your words about we protect what we love, and the words of the Senegali minister of the time. But in terms of governments, I mean, obviously you're working cross-nationally with governments within Africa. You're currently in Switzerland, I know, or I just found out at the start of our conversation. Speak a little bit about, like you're currently engaged in kind of more of a global governance conversation. And what do you think sort of the global community of governments can do to support countries that are on the front lines of landscapes that have been deforested, oftentimes kind of with kind of colonial kind of forces driving that deforestation and forest degradation? They're on the front lines of climate change and oftentimes have, really done very little to actively contribute to the climate crisis. So what do you think the kind of governments in other parts of the world, perhaps North America and Europe and other kind of so-called superpower states can be doing to support countries that are on the front line?
You know, Nicole, one of the things that I like to remember is that this is one planet, like it's all one place. And what happens in one corner affects the other. And I think one of the biggest lessons of the COVID pandemic was just how connected we are, even when we think we're so far away from each other, and that we have to care. It is in our self-interest to act in solidarity. We would actually be in as today hearing about people who have COVID who couldn't make it to this meeting today, a matter on global governance. So the solidarity of others should not even be seen as what can we do to help them, as much as this is in all of our interest that we act in this way. And I like to remember always that our supply chains are a lot more connected than we thought. First of all, when the Russian war in Ukraine reminded us just how connected we are to the supply chains in that region. For some of us, we didn't even know Kenya relied so much on Ukraine for so many things: oil, edible oils, and grains. And then, of course, most of Africa and Egypt and others, significant amount of grain. We have to remember how closely connected our supply chains are to each other. The beef industry in the US dependent upon the Amazon and the deforestation in the Amazon. So it matters what happens, and the Americans must care about what's happening to the Amazon and how their behavior drives deforestation. The same thing with mining in the Congo, which is driven a lot by the technology industry that is driven in Europe, and how those imbalances function, and how we move forward with those supply chains, and how we process, especially in these days of deep decarbonization, what it means for processing and prosperity for the communities in the Congo. Those are real issues. And we know that in Southeast Asia, the same can be said for palm oil. So there's a lot of deep connections to life for those in the biggest emitters of them, who sometimes look at us and say, what can we do to help you? No, I think this is an issue that we must interrogate together and think, what can we, all of us, do to ensure that, one, we address issues of justice and poverty, especially on the African continent, where this is an issue we must address, where most critical minerals are actually coming from, and that you actually don't have to carry iron ore or bauxite to go and process it somewhere else. We need these minerals. We can invest in a renewable energy capacity that Africa has today and begin to process and build prosperity in the African continent. So there's a lot that can be done around trade. There's a lot that can be done around green growth that is about partnership with the rest of the world.
Yeah, and such an incredible opportunity for investment, right? To enable that kind of, for that leapfrogging over kind of carbon intensive industries, or these kind of traditional take, make, waste production systems. They're really relics of the 20th century, I often say, and need to be left back there. And Africa has kind of so much opportunity to build that kind of greener kind of system starting like tomorrow. I'm just going to remind everybody, if you have a question for Wanjira, please pop it into the chat, and we will make sure that we provide a little bit of space for it. But in the interim, I'll just keep peppering you with questions. Are there any particular initiatives or partnerships, be it with international governments and African nation governments, or businesses and local community restoration and conservation initiatives? Are there any particular examples that kind of have captured your imagination, or you've kind of been impressed? Because I think one of the things that you said earlier on is that, you know, the AFR 100 aspiration is to catalytic, right? Like, so that we're not constantly reinventing the wheel. We could kind of share kind of the stories about what's working well. Conservation economy that's been built in perhaps one part of Kenya may be completely applicable to another community in a different part of Kenya or in a part of Burundi or elsewhere, or potentially even Brazil or Indonesia at some point. And so are there examples of international cooperation and collaboration, or from an international investment perspective, or businesses that you've kind of found interesting and think are worth developing further?
A couple of that I'm really excited about. One is around agribusiness, and it's around the potential for us to build prosperity on the African continent around processing of agricultural products. We have become, as an African continent, the suppliers of commodities, and we need to change that. And a lot of the commodities that come out of the continent go very far away. I was struck recently when I found out that trade within Africa, intra-Africa trade, is at 15%. In trade within Europe is 80%. Trade within Asia is 60%. So how can we begin to trade more locally? And how can we begin to build supply chains that are much shorter, that we can purchase rice from Senegal, that we can buy bananas from Uganda, and that these are the sort of supply chains that will build prosperity locally, but also increase nutritional health and food security, given how sensitive supply chains are. So that's one that I'm very excited about. How do we create these local marketplaces that drive? So Kenya, for example, has a huge market for, or at least a supply of fruits and vegetables. A lot of fruit and vegetables that make their way very far away, but they actually come in gluts, right? So you have the mango season, and you have so many mangoes, they are almost free, and then they're gone. How can we do more with mangoes? So what are the other opportunities around the mango value chain? So those sorts of opportunities are exciting, and we're learning from countries like Brazil, where WRI, essentially it's internal WRI partnerships. How do we learn from what's happening in our partner countries like Brazil, China, Indonesia, and how can some of those lessons come and inspire us? So that's one. The other one that is really exciting is with President Lula's return to president, is the opportunity to build energy around the protection of the Amazon and the sisterhood with the Congo Basin and the forests of Southeast Asia, and how that, what we call the three basins, can begin to sort of revitalize and excite their own protection, because people will realize these are the three lands of the earth. And in fact, the Congo Basin remains the healthiest of them all, because the rest are teetering or already carbon emitters. But we know that it helps to have the solidarity of others. President Lula is extremely passionate about the Congo Basin, and he speaks very powerfully about the Africa-Brazil connection. And so I know that that connection is also quite exciting, about what we can do to inspire the protection of those two basins.
Yeah, and I think I was at COP27 last year, and I think Lula had just been re-elected like within a couple of weeks, and then he was immediately at COP27 with this kind of invitation for the global community to enable these three incredible, both carbon reservoirs, cultural reservoirs, as well as biodiversity reservoirs for the world, like just incredibly rich ecosystems and landscapes with the people that are there, as well as the natural legacies that they have. And also being very clear that this is something that we have the ability to, and we want to contribute to the global movement, and we need the global movement to help enable us to do so with resourcing. But I think those that potential for cross collaboration and not having to reinvent the wheel, I think is really critical. I think we've had a question popped in about just a couple of folks have noted, I guess, AFR has been selected as one of this year's Audacious cohort, and are just wondering, what does that mean? How's it going to be applied? What kind of ways will that enable you to move forward with the work in ways that perhaps you haven't been able to up until now?
You know, what that, as you said, most generous investment does is it helps us build the capacity internally that we need. But 50% of the resources, which was also quite audacious, is destined to local communities. And so it's building the channels that allow us and the partnerships that allow us to channel those resources to local communities, to the actual restoration work on the ground. That has been difficult because, believe it or not, there's resources for small initiatives and there are resources for very big initiatives. But this missing middle, as we call it, is always the one where they're too big for small investments, but they're too small for the largest. So they've always been there in the middle. So creating financial infrastructure that allows for the mentoring and the coaching of the mezzanine organizations so that they can actually scale their operations and get. And it's also an investment in tree-based businesses. This is not all about local communities driving restoration from a public perspective. This is also about driving tree-based businesses. We have a lot of people in the Victor local cohort who are, you know, macadamia nuts business. They have established macadamia nut value chains from one tree at a time on farm. And so it's really triggering a movement of retreeing and agroforestry on farm, which we know is really important. And if a farmer has 10 macadamia trees on their farm, it's massively valuable to be able to be part of the supply chain of macadamia nuts. These, the most valuable nut, one of the most valuable nuts in the world. So that's a sort of both a commercial tree businesses across the value chain of restoration. People are establishing tree nurseries as a business because we know the planting material is the largest gap in the restoration. I mean, sometimes when there's actual planting to be done, there's not enough of a particular variety of indigenous tree. And so there are people who are investing, especially young people. We have an extremely young population. They're very innovative. And all of a sudden I hear in certain parts of Kenya, tree nurseries are popping up in their large numbers because people realize this is a business opportunity. And that's exciting. When conservation is about building prosperity, then I think we hit a sweet spot.
Yeah, that's when we hit the sweet spot, right? And one of the things that I've often heard, Africa and entrepreneurial kind of very closely associated. And I think kind of this young generation of leaders on the African continent, incredible entrepreneurial spirit, right? And so
they really are. It's amazing what they're doing. And you watch and energy, the enthusiasm, sense of purpose.
Yeah. So can you maybe just Pat, a little bit about, obviously this is come by forest, loving forests and protecting forests honestly. It's kind of woven into your DNA. Can you maybe share a little bit just around what it means to you to be, you know, so spectacularly and eloquently kind of building on the legacy of your mother's work, as remarkable as that was. Like you're kind of the next iteration of remarkable conservation work within, not just within Africa, but globally. And how the mark that she left on kind of the African and the global community affects the work that you're doing today.
Yeah, that's a special question, Nicole, because my mother was a huge influence in my life. I, in fact, started off knowing that I was not going to do anything that was connected to what she was doing because I was heading in a different direction. but such is life, and I found myself right here in the middle of her legacy, and I because of that, because of the way I came into this work, I feel completely inspired, but I also feel a deep sense of privilege because I spent 12 years every day working with my mother, something that I don't take for granted. I was in awe of her passion, her commitment, her persistence, her clarity about just how important forests were. I mean, she spoke about forests like, ice cream. We just knew this was the most important thing ever. And I would listen, and you were totally in awe and enamored by her passion for forests. And we would be traveling anywhere in the world we traveled. She would notice, oh, look, you can't see any soil, it's covered. All the green vegetation has covered. She used to call them the earth's green dress. And it's just, I was made so aware of just how important green vegetation was. And so I grew up just knowing that and appreciating that. And to be driving that legacy later, much after my mother had passed, I find such a privilege. And I tell people all the time, and some people will ask me, my mother was Nobel Peace Prize winner. She was committed environmentalist. She was also the first PhD in East and Central Africa. She was a pretty big personality, but it must be very big, hard to fill her shoes. And I tell people all the time, actually, that's not how I see it. I am basking in her light in the most spectacular way, and I have nothing but gratitude for the place that I find myself. And I also feel, as a result, a deep sense of responsibility that I carry with a lot of levity, because it is for me quite fun, and it is also very much a part of who I am. I feel like I'm in exactly where I need to be in my life, in my work. I have a privilege of serving an organization in the World Resources Institute that gives me the job that in many ways is the confluence of everything I care about. So what's not to love, people?
What's not to love? It is a gift to get out of bed every day and get to work on issues that you feel so passionate about, right? And your mother was remarkable, and you are equally spectacular, as you know. So you cast your own light, Wanjira, which is one of the things that is so truly touching about getting to work alongside of you in the ways that we're now starting to get to do through Audacious and others. Now, you have part of the glory and the joy and the incredible gifts of being part of the Audacious community is part of being part of the TED community. So I know that we both went through the perhaps nerve-wracking and exhilarating experience of giving TED Talks. Yours is already out, is that correct?
Not yet, I understand. Coming soon. I haven't, not yet. Has yours
come out
yet, Nicole?
No, mine's out, I think, on July 14th. So stay tuned, everybody.
Comes out, I think, 21st.
Fantastic. One last thing, because I know that we're at the top of the hour and we'll need to sign off. I know that this is akin to, asking you as a mother to pick which of your children is your favorite child, which I will not do. But, do you have a favorite plant or animal that you're willing to share with us?
Oh, that's hilarious. I think my favorite animal, right, at least the one that comes, I love many animals, but I love the turako, the bird that is almost invisible in a forest, but you only notice when it flashes red. It's beautiful. It flies and just a flash of red, and you know the turako is here. It's a spectacular bird.
Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Wanjira, I know that we pulled you out of a session that you're probably needed back in. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. For those of you who are wanting to know more and potentially support Wanjira's work, feel free to reach out to or to contact Wanjira, sorry, I know that you get a lot of contacts, so perhaps, we're happy to support that connection if that's helpful, rather than unleashing a whole lot of direct contact straight to you. For those of you that are wanting,
it's better than mine.
perfect. For those of you who want to support Canopy's work, don't hesitate to be in touch with Katie or Britt or myself. If we didn't get any questions that you are really wanting to ask, feel free to pop them to us. We'll look to loop back. Huge thanks to you, Wanjira. I really appreciate all that you are and what that you do in the world. Such inspiring work. So excited that you were able to share this time with us. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. We'll share a recording of this conversation with you in the coming days. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to be in touch. We love chatting further. And thanks to everybody for your friendship and support of Canopy. And here's to all of us being just that little bit more audacious today. Hope to see you next time.
Thanks for
Thanks,
your work.
Wanjira.
Big hugs.
Yeah, you too.